Jeffrey Epstein, a financier who moved in the highest circles, a convicted sex offender who maintained connections with powerful people, and a man whose death ignited a wildfire of conspiracies that reshaped American politics and internet culture. This is the story of Epstein's rise, his crimes, the elite networks around him, and how his downfall fueled a new era of conspiracy. This is Hidden in Plain Sight, the Epstein Files. Jeffrey Epstein cultivated an image of a financial genius, but much of his fortune and influence came from relationships rather than documented investment success.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating story because, he came from a working class Jewish family. His parents were, I think his father was a gardener in parks. I mean, he was very humble but very solid background. One brother went to public in American terms, public school, and did very well. He skipped 2 grades and graduated early, went to university, but interestingly, dropped out early, didn't get a degree, didn't qualify, because he had found an opportunity in the Dalton School, which is a very she upmarket, highly competitive private school for the rich and powerful in New York. And while he was there at the Dalton School, I mean, he was there for 5 years, he built up a lot of connections with parents, including the CEO of Bear Stearns, who was a parent of one of the pupils. And when he left the Dalton School in somewhat murky circumstances, no one quite knows how, there were hints of perhaps inappropriate behaviour. One of the parents, the CEO of Bear Stearns, then a big brokerage, gave him a job, and he was then there for 5 years, and also became friends with the next CEO as well. And really, if you look at his career, it was all making contacts with the rich and powerful, particularly in the finance world, in Wall Street, in New York, and providing services to them. So if you look at his business career, there are a whole succession of jobs. He was actually investigated for money laundering at one stage, although that prosecution was dropped. But the suggestion was that he did business with high-end individuals.
It's a very bizarre progression of career because, as you said, he drops out of university, he becomes a high school teacher at a very prestigious private school but doesn't have the credentials to even be a teacher. And then there's, recounts of him being inappropriate with some of the young women, even, rocking up to one of the high school parties where they're all drinking, very bizarre set of circumstances. But then, as you say, he meets these rich parents, and then one of them takes him under his wing once he's let go. And it kind of begs the question, Adam, was he always an opportunist in the sense that he was always chasing after these rich and powerful people?
Everyone says, frankly, he came across as a nice guy, not particularly aggressive or obviously on the make, someone who had good empathy and personal skills with people. And certainly everything about his career shows that he was a brilliant networker who knew how to milk and use all the contacts he made. And I think, if you look at his career from the 90s on, it's quite clear that he was also documenting, gathering evidence on the behaviour of other people, sometimes even sort of luring them into compromising situations, which certainly, I think, meant that they certainly stayed loyal to him, but because of the potential. If you look at the list of people he came into contact with, from Presidents Trump and Clinton down, to the top lawyers of the time. I mean, in his career, he hired something like 75 of America's top lawyers at one stage or another, to titans of of Silicon Valley, like Peter Thiel. I mean, he knew everybody. And if you listen to, for example, Prince Andrew talking about him in that famous Newsnight interview, I mean, what he says is he was a great person to know because he introduced me to people and things, legitimate things that I wouldn't have known otherwise.
Throughout the 1990s and early noughties, Epstein embedded himself among the global elite, from business moguls to academics and politicians. Ghislaine Maxwell soon emerged as one of the most significant figures in Jeffrey Epstein's world, a British socialite with deep connections in politics, finance and high society. Maxwell became Epstein's close associate for decades. And did that become more prominent as he grew more financially successful? He was swimming in even bigger circles of, the likes of Donald Trump and Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as you mentioned. It was kind of what he wanted to do. And you said it was the whole thing with the way he operated was that he recorded everything. Is there a reason behind that he wanted to lure in these successful people and always have some sort of ammunition, if that makes sense?
Well, my suspicion is that those people who were wary knew that there were good reasons to stay on good terms with him because, there was potential embarrassment. And I would go so far as to say you can certainly see credible reasons why when at the end of his life, he died in prison. You can see very good reasons why a lot of people might not want him around when he was being cornered like that. But that, in a sense, is to jump forward. I mean, what he was doing all the time, and, to be fair to him, as Prince Andrew said, he was clearly intellectually curious. He was clearly very good, as you say, a mathematician, very good at managing people's tax affairs. That's what he was saying. And, he was given power to run people's bank accounts for them, without having to refer back to them, the really rich people. He also was offering them excitements on the side. Quite early on, he moved his business for tax reasons to the US Virgin Islands to St. Thomas in the USVI. And that, of course, was where he ended up buying his island, so-called Pedo Island, little St. Thomas's. And, it's known that he took people there, for rest and recreation and doubtless other activities.
Was Jeffrey Epstein shy, do you think, and Ghislaine Maxwell was kind of his voice? Does that make sense?
Yes, he does seem to have been very shy. I mean, he's basically a mathematician when you think about it. A bit of almost a nerd in that way. But yes, she was very much the one who escorted him around the social circuit of Manhattan.
Behind the facade of wealth and charm was a darker reality. Epstein, with the help of accomplices, including Ghislaine Maxwell, abused minors for years. A central figure in the allegations was Virginia Giuffre, who reported meeting Maxwell and Epstein at the age of 16 while working at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort.
At the age of 16 years old, she meets Ghislaine Maxwell, who's Epstein's sort of right-hand woman.
So she meets Ghislaine Maxwell before she meets Jeffrey Epstein?
Yes.
And how did she meet her?
By all accounts, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were members of Trump's Mar-a-Lago spa club and resort, as a lot of, many wealthy figures in that area, businessmen, were at that time. And so Virginia gets a job working with her dad. So her dad's a kind of maintenance man, odd jobs man at Mar-a-Lago, and somehow knows Trump on more than an acquaintance level. So Virginia talks in her book about seeing pictures of the two of them together and, they're smiling and shaking hands. And he gets her, Virginia, a job at the age of, I think she's just turning 16. And she talks about getting a job as a $9 an hour kind of locker room assistant. So she's, at this point, she's kind of living in a trailer in her parents' backyard. She's just kind of escaped the clutches of this paedophile pimp. She's trying to make something of her life. She needs to earn money. That this is a great opportunity for her. and she starts working in Mar-a-Lago, and she talks about, putting on this crisp uniform, this white polo shirt with her name, which at the time she called herself Jenna, on this polo shirt, and she's kind of sitting and reading a book about massage therapy, because she has these ambitions to maybe, get a job above attendant level, and maybe even start learning about the human body and massage. And she talks about this woman walking in, this kind of manicured, well-spoken woman in a clipped British accent, asking her some questions like, "Oh, are you interested in massage?" And I know a wealthy man, a gifted mathematician who needs to be massaged, and we're always looking for people who are keen. And I think she was a bit confused because it was her second week on the job or something, and she has no massage experience. So she goes back to her dad and says, this opportunity's come up, and that night, she passes on her details and tells her the address, Epstein's address. And that night she goes to Epstein's house, which she kind of describes as a sort of pink painted, Pepto-Bismol coloured mansion at the end of a dead end road. So it all happened really fairly quickly after that first initial meeting.
What happened after that meeting? Was she trafficked from there?
Yeah, so she gets invited in for a massage, and to give a massage to Epstein. So she's kind of led through the house, and she sort of marvels at the maids and the gardeners and the butlers, and she's never really seen this kind of wealth before, and she's thinking, oh, I need to really impress these people. So she gives Epstein, who is lying prone and naked on the massage table, she's sort of being instructed and guided through it by Ghislaine Maxwell. And then at some point, according to her own account in the book, Ghislaine takes off Virginia's clothes, takes off her own clothes, instructs Virginia what to do, and then Epstein proceeds to have sex with her. Virginia was so prominent because, unlike other victims, she didn't sign NDAs. So there was a kind of slightly unscrupulous practice that some of these victims' lawyers were doing, which was they were settling with the accusers. The accusers and the accused were settling privately without it going public. And so a lot of these women who say, we're going to release names, they can't. They've signed NDAs. They cannot, unless they risk being sued for millions, if not billions of dollars. So there's that. And also, what we have to understand is something like 150 people claimed from the Epstein Compensation Fund. And part of the clause of claiming from the Compensation Fund was not suing anyone to do with the trafficking ring. So you have these kind of two elements that are working against the exposure of some of these names.
Out of those 11 victims that you have and are representing, have the stories and the allegations been quite similar?
Absolutely. The experiences of all of the survivors are pretty similar. There's obviously a little bit of nuance and differences between them, but it's more or less the same pattern of abuse. It's the same MO that the public has been aware of, in that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked young women to his home, usually under the pretense of performing some sort of massage or something involved with massages, and essentially exploited the women and abused them as they came to his home. Some of our victims as well were recruited, and we know that Jeffrey Epstein had a vast network of recruiters, some of them even by Ghislaine Maxwell herself. So it's very, what we know in the public information tracks with what our victims experienced. And a lot of them had very similar experiences and suffered very similar abuse by Epstein.
So Virginia Giuffre, who of course passed earlier in this year, she's the most well-known victim of Jeffrey Epstein, and her allegations before she died and after she died are the most well documented. So when you're looking at those allegations, Mary, are they similar to, you mentioned the massage aspect, are they similar to your victims as well?
I will say Virginia Giuffre has similar but also unique experience. I think she was exposed to a lot of high-profile clientele, as she alleges, or high-profile individuals that she was abused by. Certainly, there's our victims were abused by Jeffrey Epstein, and they were exposed to other individuals as well. But I think Virginia Giuffre is very similar to our victims, but kind of distinguished in that I think she really, based on her memoir and the experiences that she's publicly talked about, I think she's really suffered a lot of intense abuse at the hands of Epstein that seems to be unique to potentially their relationship or what he wanted to subject her to.
When we talk about these victims, do you find that there were commonalities between each woman?
Of course, I think Epstein was very calculated in that he knew exactly the kind of woman he wanted to abuse. He wanted to find somebody who was, vulnerable in the sense of maybe they were financially vulnerable, maybe their life circumstances rendered them vulnerable in some way. I think he definitely sought out very specifically women who he thought in his mind would be easy to take advantage of and abuse. So there is commonalities between the women. A lot of them were aspiring models or aspiring actresses. So something that he could, take advantage of, make lots of promises about, especially given that he had high profile connections and he could, flaunt that to people. And of course, that's helpful if you're someone who's aspiring to be a model or an actress. If you meet somebody who has connections, that could very well be helpful for you.
How did Epstein and Maxwell target Virginia Giuffre's character afterwards?
So what we now know is there was a kind of an incredible smear campaign going on during this time. So what we do know from some of the emails leaked to Bloomberg is that Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, after she began going public and making these allegations, they panicked and they got incredibly worried. And we see them talking about obtaining these sealed juvenile records for Virginia from Florida and leaking them to New York papers, and then kind of seeing the resulting headlines in some of these papers here in New York, talking about how she might not be trustworthy, and it kind of sowed this seed of distrust in her story. And then at the same time, we now know from some reporting in the last few weeks that Prince Andrew was apparently sharing Virginia's social security number. It's sort of like the British American equivalent of the national insurance number. I mean, I have to stress how it's illegal to obtain and share someone's social security number in America. And he's apparently sharing this with his kind of Metropolitan Police liaison officer to, directing him to look into her records. And, some of the Times' own reporting, we see Prince Andrew, his team of PR people being paid sums of money to kind of look into Virginia. And there was another interesting story about Brian Basham, who's this kind of well-known London PR man and Maxwell family friend, who's paying a journalist who's quite prominent on Twitter tens of thousands of pounds to speak to various people who might be able to undermine Virginia's stories.
As we know, in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was investigated for his behaviour, particularly in Florida and in Palm Beach. And this was the period when he knew Donald Trump most of all. And there was a criminal investigation of him by the Florida authorities, by the Florida U.S. Attorney, Alexander Acosta. And he was brought to justice. But first of all, the sentence he got was on one charge of soliciting with one girl, whereas in the evidence that was looked into, I mean, there were literally dozens of underage girls, and this was the time that his friend Ghislaine Maxwell was supposedly hanging outside high schools and bringing people in, and when apparently he had an argument with Donald Trump, which partly involved him poaching to work for him, Giuffre, who, of course, subsequently became one of the girls at the centre of the case and was underage. But when it came to the prosecution, it is clear that there was intervention higher up.
I think he spent around 13 months behind bars, but just for our audience to kind of understand how much of a sweetheart deal this is. He got a work release, so he was able to leave to his office 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He was released on probation after 13 months. He was basically allowed to, he was told he was only in jail pretty much every night. And what he said was the official, I guess, the 2019 Palm Beach County Internal Review conducted, the sheriff's office gave Epstein privileges that no other inmate had ever received. He was there only at night and in a segregated area. So his claim about what work he had to do was conduct business meetings, manage his finances, and charitable projects. So there was never even any evidence that he was conducting that at the time. But I mean, Adam, have you ever seen a situation like this?
Well, we do have open prisons for kind of white-collar offenders in this country, but generally speaking, I don't think sex offenders are treated like that, and it was a sex offence right from the start. But I think that, the most significant thing at that stage was that, people were warned off taking further legal action or legal investigation. And one of the sort of bizarre things about Epstein is that he kept on walking away from trouble. So when he was working as a debt collector at Towers Finance with Stanley Hoffenberg, I mean, subsequently that was judged to be one of the worst Ponzi schemes that had ever been. There were criminal prosecutions, but Epstein had left the business. He got away with that. And, there was speculation that maybe he was dealing with some of the stolen funds, but never proved. No one took it up. And during this period, he was meeting people like Adnan Khashoggi, the, well-known weapons dealer. But actually, it emerged that he was using a false passport. He had an Austrian passport with his photograph in it under a different name. He used that to go into a number of countries, and it was said that he was an intelligence agent, and interestingly, quite possibly an intelligence agent working for the British. So he managed to get his finger into all sorts of pies, but they, were all, or tended to be all involving very, very rich people and primarily very, very rich men.
Even after Epstein's 2008 conviction, he retained connections with influential individuals, raising questions about how power protects itself. But in 2019, following renewed scrutiny, Epstein was arrested once again, this time facing federal charges for sex trafficking minors. But just 1 month after his arrest on August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his New York jail cell. The official ruling, suicide.
He was arrested when he flew in from another one of his houses in Paris, actually, and no one's particularly looked into quite what went on in Paris. But he was being detained subject to prosecution, and he was being detained as a result of a joint action by the FBI and the New York Police Department. And he was being detained, I believe, on Rikers Island, the famous New York City prison. Now, supposedly, he hung himself in his cell with a towel. That is what the US coroners have ruled, and there was an investigation called which determined that he died by suicide.
Jeffrey Epstein, he died in prison in 2019. Do you know what the reaction was for victims seeing that?
I think it's kind of across the board. Some people couldn't believe it. Some people felt relieved. Some people kind of felt almost nothing, in the sense of, he wasn't held accountable for what he did. Death is the ultimate way out. It's final. It's done. So, it was kind of all across the board.
Epstein's 2019 arrest and subsequent death didn't just shock the public. It accelerated a new wave of online conspiracies.
I think hardcore conspiracy theorists will always be looking for more answers. And I think the Epstein case is so rich a field for conspiracy theorists because there's a lot of weird stuff. I mean, I think you can be a totally normal, sane person and say, there are a lot of unanswered questions here. How is this guy getting money? How is his money being allowed to go through banks so easily? I mean, just to choose one example. On the other hand, I do think there are a lot of reasonable people who have questions. And, there are a whole lot of files out there that the Trump administration is refusing to release. And I think those files could go a long way towards answering some of those questions. There have already been so many questions about how did the government, even before Trump, intervene to protect Epstein? Why did he get such a sweet plea deal? Why, what other evidence do we not know about that has disappeared? And maybe it's none of it, right? But I think that complicates the search. And now we have a situation where the most powerful man in the world, who we know is friends with Epstein and is very concerned about these files coming out, he's in control of the Justice Department, which, by the way, is more political than ever. Typically, you have kind of a hands-off relationship between the president and the Justice Department. They've made very clear that they're willing to do his bidding in other cases, prosecuting his enemies. And so why wouldn't they? Let's say there was a really incriminating piece of evidence, not saying it exists, but let's say it came up and it would have forced Donald Trump to resign from office, something really, really incendiary. Why wouldn't they just feed that through a shredder?
I think there is more than usual circumstantial evidence to justify an alternative theory that he might have been killed because his prosecution was extremely inconvenient. And the things I would point to is that the guards who were supposed to be looking for him unexpectedly at the time he died took an unexpected or unauthorized break, so they weren't there. Secondly, there was meant to be a security camera tape, and there is several minutes missing on that security camera tape around the time that he killed himself. So we do not see on that tape Epstein killing himself. So, people have certainly been murdered in prison before, although, as I say, the authorities in the United States and in New York City and the state of New York have, they say, looked into this and have ruled that it was suicide.
Epstein's story didn't end with his death. And in the next episode, we dive deeper into the networks that enabled him and who may have known what.